Hello, Fes. Good morning. Welcome to the show. I'm super glad to have you here. Uh, let's just start with a quick intro of yourself.
Hey Aaron, thanks for having me on. And yeah, I'm Fes. I'm Director of Sales and Strategic Accounts here at the agency, Strategic ABM. We're an international B2B tech marketing and ABM agency. And I kind of sit in the intersection between our customers and our agency specialists, our consultants and strategy team, our creative team. And yeah, it's a really exciting time to be in ABM. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. What has been your ABM experience so far? When did you start, and how have you seen it evolved over the years that you might have been involved in this? Right.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I've been in technology marketing for a number of years now. So I actually joined the agency, believe it or not, over 7 years ago, and we've always been in technology marketing, and we've worked with a range of different clients across hardware, software, SaaS, professional services, and technology and data. So we have quite a breadth of experience across different types of B2B tech marketing, pharmaceutical. Often we work in areas where there's quite a complex narrative or buyer journey. And,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, that's really where the sweet spot of ABM exists, is partly in helping to simplify messaging
Right.
for the consumer and the buyer of whatever solution there is, but
Right.
also in terms of that alignment piece, both internally and externally. So my
Correct.
experience really has been across different areas of the market, but
Mm-hmm.
also really trying to help teams to navigate their ABM journey. And
Right.
it's been really interesting, the conversations that I've had across
Mm-hmm.
our ABM lunch and learn workshops, and then working with
Mm.
client teams, and also just working with teams internally and understanding different perspectives for ABM or ABX, as some teams call it today.
Sure. So, what would be a typical engagement model, right? So, how does it start, right? So, either you find your client or they find you. What are the some of the starting points, right? And also, I'm curious to understand. Maybe it could be the next question, but you talked about the range of industries that you work with and you have clients across all these industries. But are there any specific industry from your experience that ABM really has worked well better than the other?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Just to take the first point, I guess, my favorite kind of starting point of a conversation is perhaps when somebody has watched one of our Let's Talk ABM interviews. My colleague Declan, he runs
Hmm.
a podcast himself, and there's some great thought leadership content. And
Absolutely.
oftentimes people are referred to us by other people in the industry. So, it's building up that
Mhm.
reputation in the industry. And so they're kind of a little bit self-educated in ABM, and
Mm.
they're coming to join us on our ABM workshop session, our ABM Lunch and Learn.
Mhm.
And we try and help to understand their context, their starting point. I talk to teams, at different stages in their journey. Some teams are very early into their ABM programs, and some teams are very mature, very experienced in ABM, and they have a different set of challenges. So, really,
Mm.
it's important to understand where somebody or a team or a business is in their journey, and then we can take the right steps from there. Sometimes it's
Right.
more about ABM readiness and
Mhm.
really understanding if a team is at a stage of maturity in terms of technology, content, alignment. So ABM readiness is key. Really understanding your first steps into ABM, and that can be at a company that's already doing ABM, but they may have a new solution area or a new market. How ready are they for engaging a new set of accounts in a new market?
Mhm.
Or it could be companies that are completely new to ABM. So it really depends.
Right.
And then I think your second question,
It was
I
on the
think, was
industry. It was on
the
the
industry, exactly.
range
Yeah.
of clients that you work with. Where have you seen maximum impact? Like, where is it sort of trending?
Yeah. I guess that's maybe not so much about a particular industry. I think it's, more around companies that, like I said earlier, have,
Hmm.
maybe a more complex solution, a more complex narrative around their product or complex sales cycle.
Hmm.
The industry vertical, I mean, that can, have some level of impact. It's more about the channels that you can use, and the way that you engage different buyers. Some
Right.
markets are more traditional, like pharmaceutical, and some buyers are more kind of digital native, like in
Mm.
cybersecurity, right? So there's different types
Yeah.
of personas in different markets, and you have different ways to engage those personas in buying teams. So I think, one learning for me is that no one ABM program is the same. There's always a different starting point, a different set of objectives, different type of buyer. Even if you're talking to a team in the cybersecurity space, their
Hmm.
proposition and their challenges can be quite different across different, companies targeting around the same persona, CTO, CIO, that kind of thing.
Right, I agree. So you mentioned about workshops and the lunch and learn events, right? What really goes into that, and how long does it run? And is it like a more one-to-one or a one-to-many kind of a setup? Can you talk a little bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting you asked that question. I was just speaking to Declan the other day, and we may be launching more of a webinar LinkedIn series soon, which is
Mm-hmm.
a kind of a broader audience. But
Mm.
in the current ABM lunch and learn sessions that we run, that's a one-to-one workshop with teams who are, like I say, at different stages of their ADM journey. And
Mm.
yeah, it's quite an informal session. It's a knowledge sharing environment. It's an opportunity for teams to come and talk to us about
Mm-hmm.
their current objectives, where
Right.
they are in their ADM journey. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there's some really great and frank discussions, some really
Mm.
honest discussions about where teams are. And we
Right.
try and be as honest and transparent with teams as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we have learnings from across the market. We have learnings from our agency programs, but we
Absolutely.
also have learnings from some of the relationships that we have with peers in the industry, and really
Mm-hmm.
understanding what's working, what's not working. So
Okay.
a big part for me in those ABM lunch and learn sessions is helping teams to think about, how to avoid mistakes, how to kind
Mm-hmm.
of navigate around things that, if you don't talk to people in the industry, sometimes you fall into traps that you could avoid if you have certain conversations, right?
That's right.
So it's really about getting those learnings into the market, into the
Right.
conversations that we're having.
Right. So, just curious, like this particular program, both your workshops and lunch and learn, is it part of your engagement, or is it more, let's say, information gathering session that you actually use it to, let's say, put together a proposal or help them to put together an ABM plan? How does it work?
Yeah. So again, like I said, most of the programs that we work on, they are based off some key principles of ABM. Of course, you have one
Right.
to many, one to few, one to one, deal based marketing. So there's
Right.
some key principles and some key methodology that you might think about for any ABM program, but the
Right.
nuances of every business helps to define the right starting point for your program and framework and strategy. So really, the
Mm.
lunch and learn is more educational. It's more
Right.
speaking to teams about, hey, this is where you guys are at. These are things to be aware of. These are considerations that you want to look out for. This is how to
Mm.
help drive alignment. And then maybe the next step is what we call a readiness workshop, where it's
Mm.
more of a paid session and teams come to us. We spend a day with them. We might deep dive on their objectives. That's sometimes a fit for some teams. Other teams, it's a slightly different path, right? But
Correct.
ultimately, when you work with us as an agency, there's two models. There's consultancy and there's orchestrated. Some
Right.
teams just need support with strategy and content and creative thinking, and
Mm-hmm.
and then they can take that and they can deploy it in their business through their internal resources. Other
Right.
teams, they need more hands-on support, and then we can be
Mm-hmm.
that hands-on team. So it's not
Mm.
just that we're consultants in strategy. I think the
Mm.
biggest benefit of working with a team like ours is that we have dirt under the nails. We're
Right.
doing ADM in our agency sales and marketing program, you may
Mm.
have seen some of our kind of direct mail campaigns, some of our kind of thought leadership content.
Sure.
But we also, actually run programs for clients, and there's a lot of
Right.
learnings when you're in the trenches doing the work. It's very different to just talking about it, right? And when you're
Totally.
actually doing the work, there's really understanding what data is available
Mm.
in certain markets to fuel your programs. Where are
Right.
the issues that you come across with technology stacks? Whether it's
Hmm.
HubSpot or Marketo or Demandbase or Terminus. What are the things that those platforms do well, and what are the challenges?
Yeah.
Integrations, and then how do you service the sales team as well? How do you take
Mm.
account-based marketing from being a marketing program to being a sales program to being a customer or buyer engagement program?
Right.
All of that. There's some key learnings that you could pull from our teams and
Cross-pollinate.
our knowledge. Yeah,
Sure.
that
Sure.
sometimes you just can't get that stuff out of a book, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So you mentioned about like the different types of customers that you work with, clients, and you also mentioned about pharmaceuticals, right? So the traditional companies, let's say manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, right, compared to the digital native sort of companies, right? So what are the some key differentiation in terms of the channels or even the construct of your ABM program, right? So you mentioned talked about the data availability, for example, right? Some of these traditional industries, they may not be digitally present, your buyers, right? So you might have to really tap into your events and those kind of traditional channels, right? So what has been your experience?
Yeah, I think looking at your existing customers and those opportunities that are most valuable to you in terms
Hmm.
of order value, but also deal velocity and sales cycles length, and then reverse engineering that and
Hmm.
looking at what made that a great opportunity, what made that a great buying experience for the customer. Why did they go with you? Why did they close win?
Hmm.
And really thinking about that experience. For me, account-based marketing, it's not about display ads simply. It's not about just sales outreach. It's about a customized buying experience, right?
Hmm.
And that is really focused at the enterprise level. And I don't mean just targeting enterprise companies, but when you have like a more complex enterprise solution,
Right.
it's reverse engineering that buying experience.
Hmm.
So just thinking about it from the customer perspective is
Right.
key in ABM. So how do you
Hmm.
construct your content? What kind of content experience do you have?
Right.
Looking at your sales process, how
Right.
is it buyer centric? How do you create a sales process that allows the buyer to kind of tap into your thought leadership? That might come
Right.
through introducing a peer-to-peer experience in the sales process. It
Right.
might come through making sure that um, your kind of discovery is almost potentially framed as a workshop. In the technology sector, you see a lot of CTAs book a demo,
Hmm.
and you need to evaluate what value exchange is happening at book a demo.
Right.
Is it weighted
Right.
towards the seller or the buyer? And
Hmm.
at the enterprise level, companies buy differently. Companies
Right.
buy almost through committee. So you need to
Right.
have a proposition in the market to help support that committee buying experience. And
Right.
then if you look at the industry level, like you were saying, pharmaceutical versus SaaS or something like that.
Right.
I mean, that's probably not the right terminology there because you can have SaaS with pharmaceutical sector, but I guess what I'm
Absolutely.
saying is it comes down to the experience.
Hmm.
Some buyers in the pharmaceutical sector, for example, prefer to be face to face at conferences and events.
Right.
And again, it depends on the kind of persona that you're targeting. Some
Hmm.
teams that I talk to, they have much greater success when they don't target C-suite and they're just targeting manager or director level.
Hmm.
Um, but when you're targeting more senior people, then you need to consider how to reach them and what they place value on. maybe
Right.
that's more of a C-suite engagement program where you're giving them
Right.
access to peers in their industry,
Right.
versus at a manager or director level, maybe it's more around virtual thought leadership content
Hmm.
and
Hmm. Hmm.
experiences. It doesn't have to be as in person and those types
Right.
of
Right.
activities. So
Right.
I think, it's not just about the industry, but it's also about the persona that you're targeting and the
That's right.
level and the kind of expectation on their side.
Right. So, based on what you said, is it fair to say for traditional industries, right, a field marketing type of or a field marketing powered ABM program might work better largely, right? So, of course, you can't generalize. Whereas in newer age, like, let's say, you talked about cybersecurity, for example, right? So, they're like core tech or a blockchain, these kind of new age marketing ABM programs could be very digital centric. Do you think that's
Yeah, I
a
think you
good way
need
of?
probably you need to understand your personas, who you're targeting. You need to understand their context. There's no one size fits all.
Mhm.
I definitely would consider a blended strategy. So really
Right.
thinking about the right mix of on and offline experiences,
Hmm.
and using the right approach to reach different personas. Look, people buy in different ways. You can
Right.
have, even within the same industry, you can have
Mm-hmm.
people at different levels who prefer a digital
100%.
selling environment. Other people prefer
Right.
an in-person and events environment.
Right.
And I think you need to set your program up to consider the different opportunities that you have and the different
Mm.
areas to reach your buyer, and then
Right.
customize that buying experience. So
Right.
again, ABM, it's a lot about building relationships, right? So, if you think
Absolutely.
about the three R's of ABM: reputation, relationships, and revenue,
Right.
whether this is for net new logos or existing customers, a lot of this is anchored around relationships.
Right.
And you can try and develop relationships based on people that you've already connected with in the sales process, your champion,
Right.
and try
Right.
to help them sell your
Mm-hmm.
value proposition within their organization.
Right.
And you need to listen to them and understand, how does their organization buy? What levers can you help them pull internally? Is
Right.
it, a personalized piece of content, or do we need to create, some sort of experience where we invite people either to a workshop, or maybe some sort of in-person demo experience?
Right.
How does their company buy? What's the value to them? And that
Right.
really is a customized ABM program. Now that's going
Mm.
to happen at different levels depending on a couple of key factors.
Right.
The more customized one-to-one type programs,
Mm-hmm.
that's where you may really go to town on creating a really personalized experience for a very high value account.
Right.
And then you have one to
I
few
agree. I
where
think
it's slightly
ABM
more
is relationship.
clustered, right?
Right. I agree. I think ABM is all about relationship, but it's also, it seems, it appears, right, so that it's a very hard concept for marketing or marketers who have come from traditional demand gen kind of an area, right, so where everything is very transactional, right, and if you advise them to build relationship, right, play this waiting game, uh, it doesn't appear that they have the time, right? So how do you go about dealing with, let's say, clients or teams who do not have that level of patience, nor the understanding that ABM actually is about relationship and not really transactional sort of a framework?
Yeah. Again, there's a couple of different factors to this. Average sales cycle, deal value, account value. You got to put it in the context of your objectives. What are you trying to achieve? Is this a multi-million
Mm.
dollar opportunity, or is this a $50,000 opportunity? Right. And
Right.
and oftentimes a $50,000 opportunity is the proof of concept into a multi-million dollar opportunity, right? So you got to break down
Right.
your objectives and really try and understand what are those key steps that you're trying to achieve with sales or the account team, with the customer, and then design your buyer journey to align with those key steps in the process, right?
Right.
And look, every team I speak to is trying to deliver on objectives like it was yesterday, right? We need
Yep.
to get
Yep.
something into market yesterday. We need to hit KPIs to meet our goals this quarter. Everybody's,
Hmm.
got driving, to deliver something at speed that hits their kind of KPIs. But that comes down to good expectation management and alignment internally.
Hmm.
And also really understanding your customer and how they buy. But of course, there are key things that we do in our programs to help manage those expectations. So we have a program that we call Kickstart, and Kickstart is essentially around getting something into market early and testing and
Hmm.
learning, right? So within
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
first, I would say, month to 6 weeks of us working with the client, we would be aiming to have a Kickstart program in market. And really, the objective of Kickstart is to really understand, the messages and the kind of topics that are resonating with your audience, and that can be at the one-to-one level across an account, or it could be at a one-to-many level across a number of accounts. But where are you
Hmm.
seeing engagement? What topics are driving engagement with a piece of content or a proposition like a workshop, right?
Right.
And of course, you may identify some early wins from that. But really, the objective is to get something into market, test and learn, because you don't
Hmm.
want to build a full scale ABM program without some data and
Yeah.
insights. So for me, the
Hmm.
crux of ABM is insights. That's what differentiates ABM from other kind of general demand generation programs. It's really understanding from the market or the accounts, what's driving their needs at the moment, rather than
Hmm.
just a persona based marketing push of your kind of message
Right.
and narrative and value proposition to the market. So Kickstart enables you to gather insights from the market and then optimize your messaging or your program. And of
Hmm.
course, Kickstart can include elements of lead generation, demand generation, social selling activities, those kind of
Hmm.
early stage warm up activities to your target
Right.
audience. So I would say,
Right.
in terms of how do you move things forward,
Hmm.
have a level of test campaigns in your program that you
Hmm.
can make some assessment through within the first couple of months of your
Correct.
program launch, depending on whether it's one to many or one to few.
Correct. And you said that's typically a 3-month period program. It's more a pilot program to test and then basically learn and then start
Yeah.
a full-fledged program.
Yeah, of course,
Correct.
depending on what you may have available already, you may have some existing content or assets, but you're
Hmm.
looking to use existing content, repurpose assets, and then launch something in a
Yep.
couple of months. But
Okay.
that can mean different things to different teams. It really depends on what
Sure.
type of objectives you have. Are you running a one-to-one program or one-to-many? So
Right.
there's different considerations and different channels that you can
Right.
use depending on which type of program you're running.
Right. So how do you help your clients to identify the type of program that best suits them?
Yeah. Again, that can go back to our readiness workshop, or
Mhm.
sometimes it's quite clear. Sometimes it's
Mm.
pretty obvious. This client
Mm.
has a key set of objectives, and this is the type of program that's required to deliver on those objectives, right? And that can be
Right.
quite a straight line into a one to few program or a one to one program.
Right. Right.
And that often makes more sense when a client has a level of ABM maturity. If they
Hmm.
are running an existing ABM program, or if they have ABMers internally where they have some sort of existing ABM structure, right?
Right.
Um, but I would say most of the market, it's not as clear as that, and so there's a need for maybe an ABM readiness workshop to help them really understand what type of ABM program is required.
Right.
Maybe they have competing objectives across sales and marketing.
Hmm.
Maybe they have run some pilot programs, and those pilot programs haven't worked worked as expected. So we need to do some analysis to
Right.
understand, what didn't work last time,
Okay.
and then figure out the
Hmm.
right way forward from there. Sometimes
Right.
I often see that teams build their target account list and then jump straight into campaign mode, right?
Hmm.
And that makes sense, maybe more at demand generation level. But when you're
Hmm.
looking through the lens of an account-based marketing program, the next step after account selection is often, the insights piece, really understanding the DNA of
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
accounts and buyers,
Hmm.
and that insights drives customization and relevancy and personalization,
Right.
and particularly helps you shape your narrative and value proposition. So,
Hmm.
if you skip steps,
Right.
then often what happens is you try to get to market faster in your ABM program because you've got pressure from upstairs. We need to get the campaign quickly. But the steps
Right.
that you skip ultimately means
Right.
that you result in a failed program, right?
Yeah. Absolutely right. Yeah. Uh, your thoughts on like what's the single most attribute when it comes to ABM, right? So whether it's the account selection, whether it's the personalization, sales marketing alignment, what do you think is the single most factor that uh, makes or breaks programs?
Yeah, I would probably suggest that having a really robust and clear account selection process
Right.
is make or break for a good ABM program. And the
Hmm.
reason for that is because a lot of different factors hinge off of account selection.
Right.
So if you have an account selection process that involves different stakeholder groups internally
Mm-hmm.
and potentially is even informed by your insights from customers, it's a
Right.
collective experience. It aligns
Yeah.
teams in the account selection process. Sometimes you see,
Yeah.
I speak to teams and they're like, "Oh, sales have given me the list. This is the list. We have to go after this
Right.
list." But
Right.
marketing is going to struggle because they don't have the right case studies or the right content or the right messaging for that set of accounts, and
Hmm.
so they're already on the back foot.
Hmm.
Whereas if it's a joined up effort in account selection, then there's a
Hmm.
level of expectation management and setting that you can do across different teams.
Right.
And ultimately, all the stakeholders internally are invested in this list, right?
Right.
They can all see the value in
Right.
this list. If it's only coming from one
Right.
party, then it's kind of unbalanced in the organization, right?
Hmm.
So I think account
Hmm. Hmm.
selection
Hmm.
is key to getting the early
Hmm.
stages of alignment through the rest of the program. But also,
Right.
account selection is key because it helps define everything else that comes afterwards, your value
Right.
proposition, your narrative, really understanding, like, if you've selected a set of accounts not just because they're in the same industry vertical, not just because you've got a couple of case studies for financial services, but if you go deeper than that, let's say the reason that you've selected these accounts is because your technology integrates really well with the technology that this group of customers already has in their ecosystem, and therefore there's less risk, there's more trust, there's more capability and integration. Then that's a
Right.
story that you could hook your value proposition on, right? And
Right.
sometimes that's skipped over. That logic is skipped over
Hmm.
in the kind of messaging work because that's not really
Right.
defined in the account selection
Right. Yeah.
piece. Does that give you a
Right.
few ideas?
Yeah, 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 I think that makes perfect sense because once you end up selecting the wrong set of accounts, and even if you have the other things working for you, right? I think you're just barking at the wrong tree, and then you're not going to get the results, right? Whereas if your account selection is robust, and then you identify it, but even if the other aspects are not in place or it's not working as much as you want, you could you could optimize and then correct it and course correct it and then get it into working, right? So I think from that perspective, the account selection seems to be the critical thing that a team should like pay more attention or the maximum attention, especially during the initial stages, right? And also, right, so the experts talk about how do you qualify account and how do you also dequalify accounts, and all those processes basically gets into the account selection activities. Just
Exactly.
talk a little
It's
bit
like,
about.
why these accounts, and why now?
Correct.
It needs to be a joined up effort
Absolutely.
because everybody needs to be invested in these accounts to
Right.
make it
Right.
work out
Right.
downstream.
Absolutely. Let's talk about personalization. I think you alluded to it, and then you also talked about how research is something that needs to be performed, right, before you get into the campaign mode, right? So, how do you view personalization? What type of personalization have you seen working for your clients, and how should people in general, right, approach personalization?
Yeah. I guess in my mind, there's three pillars to that.
Mm-hmm.
There's relevancy, customization, and
Mm-hmm.
personalization.
Mm.
And the best ABM programs get those three pillars working well together
Right.
across the account experience, across the buyer
Mm.
experience, right?
Right.
So relevancy, can include things like timing. We got the right message to the right accounts at the right time.
Right.
Customization is really understanding the value proposition and taking that in a customized format to a customer. For
Mm-hmm.
example, you can have your generic value proposition, but if you know that this customer has a specific type of technology in their business that you integrate with, or that you want
Mm.
to customize your story to talk about that, in a more meaningful way.
Mm.
And then personalization is where you're looking at it, at the company level, at the kind of decision making unit level, and then at the
Mm.
contact level, and making, creating more personalized narrative into the account.
Mm.
If you imagine an account can have multiple different buying teams globally, a buying team
Yeah.
in the US might have different challenges to a buying team in France or Germany. They're the same company, but they're at
Right.
different stages of their maturity, their business maturity, whatever. Different, they might
Right.
even sell the
Right.
same products in their line of business,
Mm.
but they have different
Right.
challenges, different regulatory compliance, let's say, some
Right.
stuff like that,
Right.
right?
Right.
So that personalization comes down
Mm.
to really understanding who you're talking to in the account
Mm.
and what's in it for
Mm.
them,
Mm.
and really
Right.
understanding their kind of jobs to be done. What level do they sit at in the
Mm.
organization? What buying tasks do they have? Are they doing the research for somebody more senior because they've been asked to go out and find solutions in the market that fit a challenge? Or are they somebody more senior
Yeah.
that they have a vision
Mm.
for their organization and
Mm.
they're trying to figure out, well, how do I bring my vision to
Mm.
life in a practical sense? What technology, what services, what process do I need, right? So, there's a few different
Right.
considerations there, but customization, relevancy, personalization, those are the three pillars. I think it's not just about personalization because if you just use that language of
Mm.
personalization, people think, oh, I'm going to put the logo on there of the company.
Mm.
I'm going to put
Mm.
their company name in
Mm.
there. Oh, I'm personalizing it.
Mm.
That's not really,
Right.
in my mind, that's not really true ABM, right? That's
Right.
a very light version of ABM, which is fine in some
Right.
scenarios, particularly in the
Right. Right.
Kickstart campaign when you're just trying to test the message or get some data. Yeah, you can have like a light personalization. You could send an
Mm.
asset with a personalized logo on it. But
Right.
the levels going deeper after that really, is when you get into
Right.
proper ABM.
Right. Yes, what you're saying is the moment it gets into that one to few, one to one kind of ABM type programs, right? So the way the personalization, the meaning takes a different sort of like a deeper uh, insight in terms of just not like a very high level company personalization or anything like that, but it's more messaging. What are the pain points, challenges to that cohort of accounts who's sort of facing, and how do you message or respond to that pain point?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's also, account-based marketing and contact-based marketing,
Mm.
right? So
Right.
account-based is like you have a value proposition for an account and then
Mm.
you're engaging an account. It could be in one market, one region, or it could be globally.
Yeah.
And then there's contact level, stakeholder profiling,
Mm.
really understanding
Mm.
the people within the organization that you're talking to, and
Right.
that's where you can create really unique moments with
Mm.
buyers. That's where you could do those really personalized touches.
Mm.
And sometimes you could do that at the one to many level,
Mm.
and you could also do it at the one to one level.
Right.
Maybe at the one to many level, it's more of a light touch personalization, but it's still, you're
mm,
talking to an individual. You can do some research on their LinkedIn profile. You could maybe create a unique moment for them. Um,
mm,
and then, at the one-to-one level, this is probably where you're, talking to an existing customer. It's a very
mm,
high value relationship. You want to create
mm.
something really engaging for them. So,
Right.
you got to think of it at different levels. It's not,
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
it's not it's not so transactional as the word you used earlier. I think, you really got to place
Mm.
emphasis on relationships.
Yeah.
And if you start with the mindset of
Right.
relationships instead of leads, I think it changes the whole way
Mm,
you think
mm.
about sales and marketing.
I agree. Yeah. I think it's all about like telling the customer or the prospect that I know what your problems are, pain points are, challenges are, and let's just work together, right, in solving that, right, in your communications.
Yeah,
Let's
becoming that
talk a little
trusted
bit about,
partner.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's talk about ABX, and I think you sort of referred to it a couple of times, right? Is that really a word play, or is there more to it's an ABM plus kind of a thing, or right, or it's just something has to change, so we replace M to X and we call it with a new abbreviation. So, what's your view on it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, obviously, ABX to me is kind of just a industry term, particularly from some of the technology vendors. And I get it. I understand that there
Mm.
is value in that term. I'm probably more of a purist, and I just feel like account-based
Right.
strategy, account-based marketing. There's more of a strategic framework around that. But for me, actually, I think there's
Mm.
again a few different angles on this. There's account-based marketing, and there's marketing strategy and planning work that needs to be done for an account-based marketing program, right? And then there's account-based sales, and account-based
Mm.
sales can have different considerations at one to many through to one to few, one to one. At one to many, it's probably more about SDR teams and top of funnel engagement. At one to one, it's probably more around account
Mm.
teams and strategic sellers in the organization, and probably even more about executive and peer to peer engagement programs, right?
Yeah.
Um, and,
Mm.
and for me, you have account based marketing, you have a account based sales, and then from the customer side of it, you have account based experiences, right? So almost account based
Mm.
ADX is
Mm.
more of a experiential, the end result. It's that's the mindset that I have. It's bringing together sales and marketing, that orchestration piece that then is what the customer experiences, and I think that's a really nice way to
Mm.
position ADX. It's not your
Mm.
sales and marketing team how they go to market, but it's actually how the customer experiences your brand from an account based perspective. So I think if you think about ABX in that light, I think it kind of maybe changes the dynamics a little bit, and then it
Mm.
does have value in the way that you talk about experiences.
Sure. Yeah. Makes sense. First, I
Do
think
you do
it's
you have
been a
a,
great.
a view on that?
Yeah. No, I don't know. I think it's not a fully understood terminology, right? And I think we're trying to get into a concept of knowing or a notion of knowing what exactly it is, and that's the reason I wanted to sort of have your viewpoint, right? So I think the way you put it, right, when you see it from the customer's viewpoint, right, it's all about experience. It really doesn't matter whether you're representing a sales organization or a marketing organization, right? So am I having a consistent experience when I engage with this particular right service provider, vendor, or whatever, right? And if that is a term that sort of unifies and provides that messaging consistency, and I think there's no harm in sort of calling an ABM or an ABS into an ABX, right? And I think, but like I said, it's not a very fully understood terminology. I think people are coming into terms with it. Anyway,
Yeah,
first,
I would say that we probably don't need another acronym in sales
exactly,
and marketing.
exactly.
But if we do use ABX in the industry, then it should
Mm.
really focus on the customer and the customer's
Right.
experience, because I
Correct.
think at the end of the day, that's the most important
Right.
consideration.
Right. 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 Excellent. Hey, thank you so much for your time, Fes. I think it has been a fascinating conversation. A lot of things that we touched upon, which is very relevant, and these are some of the questions that keeps coming in my conversations, right? So I think the viewers are going to be benefiting from this particular conversation. Thank you so much for taking time and then talking to me. Uh, any parting comments, thoughts that you have before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would just say, always be learning. Things are changing quickly, and for your audience out there, I would suggest, getting as much insights from peers in the industry
Mm,
is hugely valuable. And
mm,
really thinking about who you can connect with, who you can talk to, who's got great experience in
mm,
perhaps the types of programs that you're planning to run or thinking about running, and
right,
tapping into those learnings. I think it's
right,
really important to help set you up for success.
right. It's well said. Thank you so much. I know you're pretty active on LinkedIn, so we'll make sure that we include your profiles of people if they wanted to reach out, have conversations, right? So they have that information available. Once again, thank you so much for your time, right? Until we meet next time. Bye.
Brilliant. Thank you.